Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's presentation, South African Wildlife Photography with Danielle Carstens, is being brought to you by NatHab Expedition Leader Charlie Reinertsen. Charlie is the founder of Two Line Studios and holds a dual master's degree in natural science education and environment and natural resources from the University of Wyoming. With more than a decade in conservation and science communications, he's a photographer, videographer, writer, exhibit developer, and commercially licensed drone pilot who created the Northern Peatlands Project, a photographic journey through one of Earth's rarest ecosystems. As an expedition leader, Charlie guides wildlife photography and ecology expeditions from Yellowstone to Mexico's monarch butterfly biosphere reserve, bringing his diverse expertise in visual storytelling and natural sciences to each trip. Danielle is a former physical therapist who transitioned to conservation work and formerly chaired the Wildlife and Environment Society of South Africa's Lowveld Division, while actively supporting South African canine anti-poaching units. She led photographic safaris across Africa from famed regions like South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and Kenya to lesser-known areas like Sudan, Lesotho, and Madagascar. As an accomplished photographic guide who joined NatHab in 2023, Danielle combines technical photography expertise with deep understanding of animal behavior to create captivating wildlife stories. Thank you both for being here with us today. Charlie, take it away.
Thanks for that introduction, Rob, and thank you all for joining us today. We have a gorgeous library of images to explore today from Danielle, and I'm really excited to dive right in. We're going to be talking about the wildlife ecology and stories behind these images, and we're also going to be talking about technical aspects of how do you get a photo like this, and everything from settings and approach to taking the photograph to editing the photograph afterwards. So Danielle, just to kick us off here, tell us a little bit about how you got into photography and guiding.
Ollie, thanks, Rob. It's great to be here again. How I got into photography, I get this question quite often, and as long as I can remember, I had a camera with me, but it started off as one of those disposable ones with you would throw away after your school camp or whatever. So I was always given a camera by my parents when I went on a school outing, and as long as I can remember, that's the excitement of going to the store to receive your developed film photographs. And yeah, it was since a young age, and then obviously that merged with my love for wildlife, which I'd been exposed to since I was a toddler, and it just merged into a beautiful photographic career for me.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. And before we dive into this library, the first library we'll be looking at will be all images from South Africa. Tell me a little bit about the natural habitat adventures trips that you lead. Where are places that people can travel with you on a NatHab trip?
So I lead the Secluded South Africa expeditions, and on that expedition we visit 3 areas in South Africa. So we travel quite a bit in terms of destinations, and it gives us the best of what I think South Africa has to offer. We start off at Madikwe Game Reserve, which is a bit northwest of Johannesburg, and then we're off to Marataba, and the next one we end at Mala, which is next to the Sabi Sands, which is probably the most famous of the 3. But those regions basically give us, as I said, the best of what South Africa has to offer. Big 5 in all of them, but that's not all we focus on. There's a lot of bird life, a lot of special animals. Actually, this year I've had my most rare wildlife sightings on these NatHab trips. I mean, we've seen things that I've never seen, things that I've rarely seen on trips. So it does give everyone a chance to see the bigger things, but also the smaller, lesser seen, lesser known wildlife, which is one reason I love the trip.
That's really cool. What's one example of one of those smaller wildlife that you saw that you had never seen before?
About 2-3 weeks ago, we were driving along on a game drive, and the sun was pretty much set already, and we saw a guinea fowl alarm calling, and we thought, oh, maybe it just saw a hawk or an eagle or something. And suddenly one of the guests shouted, "Stop, stop, go back. There's a cat." And I thought, okay, maybe it's a lion, maybe it's a leopard. Turns out it was a caracal, and never really seen one in good light. I've seen few in the nighttime, but fleeting. And there was this caracal in the grass, calm as can be, looking at us, actually probably looking at the guinea fowl, but just staring straight ahead in pretty okay light. And yeah, everyone realized suddenly how special it was, because obviously it was something that no one's ever seen before, or very few have seen before. So that was one special sighting. And then the other one on the same trip was a serval, which is common in other areas, maybe in East Africa more common, but at Mala Mala, our local guide told us that she hadn't seen one in about 3 or 4 years. So yeah, that was pretty special. And both of those are small wildlife species that don't get attention, but that's the beauty of it.
That's really neat. I love those stories, and that they were so recent. Well, I'd love to dive in with this first image here from South Africa. So tell me a little bit about what are we looking at here, and what time of day? Is this early morning, late evening? Where are we here?
We're in one of the dustiest places on earth, which is great for photography. But this was at Madikwe. This is our first reserve that we visit on the secluded South Africa trip, and the sun was setting. And Madikwe has this really orange soil because of the iron-rich content. So not only does it give you beautiful orange dusty backdrops, but it also reflects that orange from below. So it's really it gives you like a glowing, as you can see, it gives you a very glowing sort of image. I didn't edit this much at all. This is almost straight out of camera. I think I lightened the elephants ever so slightly, but that's what Madikwe gives you. And I came across the elephants, and I just thought this is the most beautiful scene. It's maybe busy in the foreground, which doesn't matter to me because the background was just absolutely glowing. So that's what I love about that place, is the golden, it's almost like a golden hue that's present all the time, mornings and evenings, that you get.
Yeah, that's stunning. One thing that I'm noticing, so you're kind of, it feels like you're backlit a little bit. The sun is in front of you, or maybe off to the right. How did you get the exposure, where you wanted it on this image? Are you using a certain metering or customizing that? Because I would imagine this would be a little tricky to get the right exposure.
Yeah, exactly. And agreed, it is. I use Matrix Evaluative ESP, whatever brand you're referring to, but basically a global metering out of the whole screen, or the whole sensor. But I don't include the sun in the shot, because I do find that makes the animals into a silhouette pretty quickly, and then you have to fight with your exposure. So I tend to aim it at the animal, and then if I can, position us and the camera so that the sun is just out of frame. And you're right, it's top right, at a very low angle coming in, but it would be a completely different exposure had it been included in the frame. So generally I tell my guests and leave it out the frame until it's gone or really, really low, and then the exposure is easier. But I did overexpose ever so slightly on this, and then I lightened up the elephants later on. But the reason they didn't go completely silhouette or dark is because the sun's not directly in the frame.
Beautiful. And one thing I'll mention for folks listening in, as we have this conversation, please submit questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. So we'll come back through these photos and talk about, there might be certain technical aspects or pieces of the story behind the photos that you're more interested in. So please put those in the chat. But before we move on from this image, I think something that stands out with your photography and is kind of like quintessential successful wildlife photography is that the eyes of the wildlife are always in focus. And I'm just looking at this baby elephant and the eye is just perfectly in focus. Do you have any tricks that you use to be able to try and get that, or are you taking tons of photos in a moment to try and get the one that works?
Yeah, it's funny because there's two subjects here and it's hard to choose which one to focus on, especially if you're working with a shallow depth of field with a telephoto lens. But the baby always takes it, I always prioritize the little ones because that's what draws the attention, and that's where the focus is emotionally, if I can put it that way. So single point focus generally, in a case like this, definitely single point, small point focus, because there's things in the foreground that will definitely interfere with your focus if you're on a bigger point or a large area of focus. So in this case, nailing the small point, single point focus, definitely. I wouldn't even use my tracking here because I find that tracking isn't yet that good with elephants. It often picks up on the tusk or on the ear or on something else. It is an odd looking animal. It doesn't look like a dog or a cat, so I can understand tracking is not yet so good at that, but absolutely single point as small as you can in this case. If there was nothing in the way, then maybe a larger point, but still a focus point that you're in full control of, not leaving it to the camera, because the camera won't know in this case what to pick, whether it wants to pick the mother or the calf. So if you really want the calf in focus, that's what I do. And then I do increase my f-stop, my aperture, slightly when there's two animals like this close together, just to make sure that they both in focus, but only when they're really close together. If they're far apart, then your depth of field won't get there anyway. But in this case, they were very close together, so I probably would have gone something like f9, I'm guessing. But that's what I would do. Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's take a look at the next photo here. So big, I just want to switch back and forth between these two for a second. Huge shift in kind of style of photography. Tell me a little bit about the wildlife that we're seeing here, where you took this photo, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of your choices around how you expose this.
Yeah, I love a low key, what we call, a low dramatic sort of minimal light left over in the frame. I love that. I love the drama, and I love the sort of mysterious effect that it gives you. It's a red-billed oxpecker on a rhino, and as we saw it, it was harsh. It was late morning already. I think it was about between 9 and 10 in the morning. So the light was very harsh and very high up already. And so I looked at it and I thought, well, only parts of it is strongly lit and the background's beautifully dark and the rhino is beautifully dark in the front. So, let's underexpose and see how it comes out. And it looked completely different to the normal exposure. So I took away about 3 stops of light here and it came out beautifully. I mean, you wouldn't even think it's the same scene if you looked at it with a naked eye versus what the camera told. And that's why I love photography, is we can manipulate light to get a creative outcome like this. So yeah, I love it. I'm a minimalist. I love negative space. I love minimalism. So I think my eye just gets drawn towards these minimalistic scenes and a way of portraying it in a minimalistic way. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And just a little bit more on the technical side too, if someone's trying to explore low-key images where you're exposing for the highlights, so you're trying to protect the highlights and then drop everything out. Are you, wildlife photography is really fast. You have to try and get the shot really quickly. Are you shooting fully manually, or are you, an aperture priority and choosing to expose under by adjusting that setting? How do you kind of have that balance of the creative control and also being able to take a photo really quickly because it might not be there forever.
And that's exactly what you say there, creative control and reaction time. And those two are super important. I always say to people, you know, those are important, getting creative and doing it fast. And in this case, well, 99% of the time I'm on manual with auto ISO. So I'm not on full manual just because things happen very quickly. And we're often working in differently lit scenes. You know, the fish eagle is perched in the shade and suddenly it flies out in bright sunlight and the whites on it just completely blow out. So there's no time in full manual to change your exposure in those 2 seconds. So that's why I like to be on manual with auto ISO, but I do watch my ISO and I do cap my ISO at a certain maximum. So it's also something I hear often from guests is I don't like manual auto ISO because my ISO just runs up way high. And I say, well, you're able to cap it and it's only going to go up to where you would have set it in full manual anyway to get the exposure that you wanted. So you need to control auto ISO and you need to keep an eye. It's like a naughty child. When it gets dark, you need to keep an eye on it. So it runs all over the place if you don't stop it. And in this case, it gives me the opportunity to have my ISO do its thing, and I control the exposure with my exposure compensation. So I have a shortcut set up. It's my thumb dial. I think it's my back dial, yeah, as my exposure compensation. So as soon as I want to do that, I've got quick access. I just turn it. I don't always look where it stops. I just keep turning it until I see in my electronic viewfinder that it's dark enough, and then I'll take the shot. But it has to happen quickly because next thing you know, the oxpick has flown off or the rhino has lifted its head or something. So it is a reaction time thing, and for that reason, I like the ISO to be on auto, and the aperture and the shutter is in my full control.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great shot and awesome explanation too. So now we're kind of on the other end of that spectrum, a high key image. Where are you in this image geographically, and what's kind of the setup with where you are in a vehicle, I imagine, to be able to get this shot?
Yeah, so this was at I must think, I think it was Marataba, our second destination on the secluded South Africa. And it's actually such a happy photo because cheetahs have a really tough time surviving. They're pretty low on the predator hierarchy. So to see a mother with so many cubs, I don't think all of these cubs have made it to adulthood, and that's pretty normal for cheetahs. But just this photo in time was for me a really nice sort of story, you know, more so than lions, because lions have a better survival rate, much better survival rate than cheetahs when they are cubs. So yeah, this was fantastic to see, and the interaction and everything. So we came across this scene, but it was already very harsh light and it was hot. I think this was in an October safari. So obviously they were seeking out shade, and they are actually in deep shade here with a brightly lit grassy background and a bright foreground. So in color, this would have been pretty bland because they were in the shade, and you have to brighten them up so much and overexpose so much that they lose their saturation, and it just doesn't look great. And that's I have this term that those who've been on safari with me will know. I say, if the light's not right, make it black and white, at least in Africa. I don't know if it's in other places, but in this case, the light was terrible, but we overexposed by 2 or 3 stops to brighten them up. Background and foreground went completely light, turned it into black and white, and they make excellent black and white subjects because they are two-toned. They've got, you know, light fur and then these dark spots. So same with zebras, same with giraffe, same with leopards. All of those spotty, two-toned, spotty or stripy animals make for great black and white images. So this just worked wonderfully. You know, it's either that, or you put your camera down and you don't take a color image because the light's so bad. So in this case, this was the perfect scenario for, as you say, the opposite of what the oxpecker and the rhino was, taking away light and exposing for the highlights. This is exposing for the shadows, and therefore the highlights all go very bright.
Yeah, that's awesome explanation. And are you in a vehicle? Are you stabilizing your camera somehow?
Yes,
You know,
yeah, sorry, yeah, we're in a vehicle, not too close, because the further you park, the further away you park, the lower your angle is, but not too far to get a lot of heat haze in between you and the wildlife. But we are in a vehicle here. Um, Cheetahs are very habitual to people on foot. They're the most habitual cats, but I prefer being in the vehicle when, there's no reason to get out. Then yeah, you shoot from the vehicle and they're completely comfortable with your presence in the vehicle.
and I love just the moment that you got. I imagine this one you probably took a lot of photos and just
I
kind of
did, and
found the right.
I wish that 1 second from the right would have looked. Like you go through all your photos hoping for the perfect shot, but it's like kids. It's just one this way, one this way, one this way, one lying
Yeah,
on its back, one hiding behind the other. So this was the best one out of the series. Yeah.
that's really fun. And just to get the moment of the one licking the mother, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, she's very
Very-
tolerant, Mom. Yeah.
yeah. All right, let's take a look at this next one. Something that I see a lot in your photos is really nice use of something in the foreground to give you context for what you're looking at. So I love how this one is shooting over the back of one animal to get a look at the next one. It feels like you're in the herd on this, shot. So tell me a little bit about where you were and how are you able to see these animals like this?
I should get you to caption all my posts on social media, Charlie. Because that's exactly like my thoughts, but you just put it nicely. So this was Mala Mala. This was in the last destination on the secluded South Africa, and it's not very common to see Cape buffalo there. They migrate freely between the Kruger National Park and other properties over Mala Mala. They go where they want to. So it was quite special to see these buffalo. And I do love to use the foreground, and I do love to fill the frame with the other animals. I find it's very, especially in in herds of buffalo, herds of impala. What else works? Herds of elephants sometimes. If the whole frame is filled with the animal, then it simplifies it to me. Again, it's a method of simplification. There's no bright vegetation or bright highlights drawing your eye away from your subject. It sort of just acts as a neutral background that adds to the story. And honestly, there was no way to not get this buffalo in the foreground because they were just everywhere and the herd was massive. So I thought, well, can either fight it or not, and use them as a foreground as well as a background, and it worked out pretty well. And we were waiting for one to make eye contact because they're forever grazing, and it's hard to get one looking up at you. But this female did, and yeah, got it at the right moment.
Very cool. And I imagine a lot of the environments, I've never been to these places, but I imagine a lot of the places where you're photographing are really dusty. Do you have any tips for, are you typically just keeping one lens on when you're out, or for when you're switching lenses? Anything in your kit that you'd recommend for people who are, hoping to photograph in this area to help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Dust, it's often a fine dust in these areas that you don't even realize is in the air. And then you get back to your rooms at night and you can feel there's like a layer of dust on your lens, and you look at your front element and it's all dusty. So yes, I do not change lenses in the field if I don't really have to. So I recommend 2 camera bodies. If you don't, then a variable zoom, like a zoom lens with a variable focal length is best. If you only have one body and one prime lens and you're going to want to switch the whole time, to another lens, that becomes a little bit tricky. So I would suggest a zoom lens or two camera bodies. And then in terms of protecting your gear, I always have this little like scarf or pashmina thing that I found in the closet that I put over my gear. So when we're driving around, often it's, you're driving behind another vehicle or you're passing another vehicle on the dirt roads, and that creates a mountain of dust that you drive through for a good amount of time. So yeah, I do have my gear covered all the time, something that's easy to just whip off and shoot, not something cumbersome that's got a zip or in a bag or anything, something that you can literally just throw off and take the photo within a few seconds. And then for yourself, and this is something that I never used to understand, people wearing gaiters or buffs. I never knew the use of them, and it is my most crucial item in my backpack for dry season safaris in Southern Africa, actually, is just to have it around my neck, put it over my nose and mouth if we're passing a vehicle, and then I even wet it when it's hot, and it's a nice little coolant, but absolutely necessary if you're struggling with sinusitis or hay fever or something. It's not, most people don't, but it is just more comfortable for me to have that available. But the dust, it's a love-hate relationship that I have with it, because I absolutely love dusty photos, and it makes for amazing dramatic photos when the animals are fighting, kicking up dust, when the elephants are kicking up dust, or dust bathing themselves, backlit dust. It is one of my favorite elements, but as I say, it's a love-hate relationship with it. Yeah,
I can imagine. All right, let's take a peek at this one. So when I first took a look at this photo, I was so disoriented. And I love what you've done here with the exposure to, obviously playing with negative space. But I still don't entirely know what we're looking at. Describe, the bottom, it looks like there's a wetland. We're looking at water, and then maybe that's a reflection in the top.
yeah. So the funny story about this image is we could see nothing except for the silhouette. So as we were driving back to camp, the sun had already set, and this is literally what we could see. So we were also disorientated because we saw this bright water and then these sharp objects, and then realized it was a rhino drinking water. And instead of again fighting the light and trying to get a good exposure, we just drove around to get a full-on view of the water, and then the rhino's horns just sticking out as a silhouette in the water. So that's how we actually spotted it, is just by the silhouette, not by anything else. It was pitch dark already.
Oh, it looks like we might have lost connection just for a minute here. Rob, is the connection still working for you?
It looks like she's a bit frozen. I'm sure she'll be right back with us.
Perfect. Just so we can take a peek while we wait, do we have any questions in the chat that have come through so far?
We do, but she's back.
Oh, welcome back, Danielle. Yeah, so I lost you. You were just describing how you were shooting in near darkness and that you had found the animal with the silhouette. And I'm curious, were you pushing the ISO on this shot, or was the reflection in the water enough that you didn't have to too much?
Yeah, exactly. When we filled the frame mostly with bright water, that brought the ISO down considerably. So it was still pushing, but it wasn't as high as it would have been if we tried to get a better exposure of the rhino in any way. So the bright water definitely helped. Yeah.
I think it's pretty amazing with how little of the outline of the rhino we have that immediately you're able to recognize that that's what you're looking at, which is really neat with the composition.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's take a look at this next one. Kind of going back to the beginning of when we were talking about low-key images. Is this another full sun, bright day where you're photographing this?
This was actually, if I remember correctly, morning sun, but later in the morning with a very shady, very deep shaded background, and the side light coming through on the elephant. And I always love photographing elephants in side light because it just brings out their wrinkles and their texture on their skin so much more than front light does. So it looked, we just saw this and you could just like feel the image, you know. It was just such a calm elephant, and it was just a still moment. And yeah, we tried underexposing and it worked really well. I think I did underexpose the background in post a little bit more, but not by much. I preferred to take images as best as possible in camera and then play around with what's necessary afterwards. Yeah.
It's awesome. I would imagine with an image like this, you could choose to spend an infinite amount of time editing, and I think that you've done a really tasteful approach of just, you know, like you said, relying on what's in camera, shooting it at the settings that you want, and then just doing really minor modifications to get it to the final step. It's really, really,
the golden light is just gorgeous on it.
yeah, absolutely. And then this image it stands out to me. I mean, when you get this close to an elephant's eye, you realize just how many lashes they have that are also in the way of you trying to focus on the right spot. Is this, you know, a really hard image to get because the pupil is perfectly in focus?
Most people go on safari and go home without knowing what color an elephant's eye is, because they are constantly shading their eyes with their eyelids and their eyelashes. Their eyelashes are extremely long, and that's often, you know, you hear people saying, wow, look at that, when they pass by closely. And that was the beauty of this image, was that you can actually see the amber color of the elephant's eye, and it had light in it. And that is a really rare occurrence. If you've ever tried to do close-ups of an elephant eye, you will know. It's very, very difficult. I would have loved the elephant to look straight at the camera, but I took what I could because I know how rare it is to actually get that. And maybe the contrast between the white and the amber and the black actually made it easier for the camera to focus on that. But it is definitely a more rare occurrence, definitely.
Yeah. And on this one in particular, are you using like a 500 millimeter lens? How long is your lens to be able to get something like this?
I think this was a 500. Yeah, this was taken at 500 as far as I remember. But elephants are extremely habituated in the areas that we visit on these safaris. Obviously, the local guides know the temperaments of the elephants really well in that area, so they determine how close or how far the elephants can approach the vehicle. But often, if you're just sitting still and the elephants walk past you and you read their posture, you read their behavior, and they're completely calm, then they can walk right by you. I mean, you can stick out, you shouldn't, but you could stick out your arm and they're right there. So, you know, then we just say, just enjoy, take your phones if you want to, but they, you know, they definitely, it's just a moment to experience and just to realize how close you are to them. And they're completely calm. They're some of the most placid animals, if you catch them in the right. You know, they might have a bad reputation as being aggressive and that, but they're not at all. Certain cases are, but you read their behavior pretty quickly, and they let you know when they're not happy, and then you get out of there. But generally, we've had some incredible elephant experiences on this this specific trip, because Madikwe has a very, very high number of elephants. Marataba also to a certain degree, and then you see a lot of them at Mala Mala too. So you get plenty of elephant opportunities. Yeah.
Very cool. One thing that I've, you know, in some of my images when I'm editing, there are ways to blur areas after you take the image. Is that something that you ever do in post-processing, or do you prefer to just what's in focus from the camera is what you like to present afterwards?
Yeah, I'm a purist for sure. I mean, not everyone can have a prime lens, and I used to have one, and I swapped it out for a zoom lens, so I missed that prime lens effect. But I still think a lens effect in camera is more natural than one added in post-processing for now. I'm sure it is going to improve to the point where you can't really see the difference. But to me, it's also about the fun of the challenge in the field, you know, getting it all right and getting it all to come together in the field. I guess if, you know, if it's a print and someone's asking for a more blurry background, then that's something I would consider. But in general, I would love to, you know, it's not only aperture, it's not only lens type, it's your angle and it's the distance of the background, and it's all sorts of elements coming together to give you a beautiful blurry bouquet or background or certain areas. So I like the challenge of it, and I think if you only rely on doing that in post-processing from the get-go, it takes away half the fun of
Yeah,
taking the image. Yeah.
that's great. I love that answer. So we're back to a high key image, and you know, based on what you've told me already about black and white, I'm guessing that this was challenging light. Uh, but tell me a little bit about, you know, why did you choose to go black and white with this image, and what were you thinking about to try and get, you know, the proper exposure for what you were looking for here?
Yeah, in this case, the light, the good light was gone already, but the pose was too good to throw the photo out, and the leopard is too beautiful. It was just such a, yeah, such a beautiful leopard and such a beautiful pose and relaxed, and yeah, I decided to keep it. And then again, I preferred black and white just because the highlights were very harsh and the shadows were quite deep in the color version. And again, like a cheetah, the leopard was makes for a beautiful black and white conversion. If, you know, for animals that are completely white like egrets and that, it's not appropriate, but for animals that give you contrast in their natural coloring, it works so well as a black and white conversion. I think I did keep the color version, but I definitely preferred the the black and white. And also there's nothing else distracting um, from the leopard. You know, there's no dark foliage, there's no deep shadow. So the whitish canvas around it made me also consider that it would make a nice high key sort of more fine art than a literal photograph.
Yeah, the composition of this one is great, and like you were saying, there's no distracting elements, and you know, knowing that you're trying to keep it as close to what was there initially, that kind of speaks to just the moment that you had there, which is really cool. This one struck me as being very different than, you know, the previous batch of photographs. What excited you about this photo in particular?
So you don't often see elephants climbing semi-mountains or ridges. I mean, they do, but it's quite different to see them hanging out on a cliff. This is actually a very steep cliff. It doesn't look that steep in the photograph, but he had to do some climbing to get to that area. And then, I mean, we were stopping for a coffee break actually at Madikwe, and our local guide said, "Oh, look at the elephant," and everyone's staring at this rock face, going, "Where's the elephant?" And because of the coloration at that time of the year and the soil color and everything, it just blended in so beautifully. It's a bit of a Where is Waldo photograph, because it completely took us by surprise to see an elephant in between the rocks. If it didn't move, it pretty much was an elephant. So and if you look closely, there's more elephants, which we also only saw on our photos afterwards, but there's more elephants to the left of that elephant, the younger ones. That would actually be a female, but there's some young ones in there too. And I mean, the more we looked, the more we saw. So it's just the element of, you know, it's a camouflage in a sense, but it's also a habitat or an environmental image. So as much as I like close-ups, I think it's also important to portray an animal in its environment where it's appropriate, you know, not a distracting environment, but something that adds to the impact of the image, which I thought in this case it did.
Yeah, I thought, you know, your choice here of the composition of the placement of the animal in the larger landscape was really interesting, because I think it heightens what you said, the Where's Waldo aspect, where it's not necessarily the first place that your eye goes where the elephants are. It is almost rule of thirds in the pocket there, but just off enough that I think it gives you time to kind of search around to figure out what you're looking for, which I thought was really neat. Very cool. All right. And here we have beautiful low light. This looks like kind of evening light, maybe. Um,
Yeah.
and the composition here of just the placement of the animal within the frame and just the soft light on the brush behind, and then your choice to have the animal fill the frame top to bottom, but just barely inside it with the hooves right on the bottom of the image. I thought this was really, really nice. Did you play around with composition a lot, or did you kind of find this and that was the end of the story?
We didn't really, actually, we didn't really have much time. The giraffes were actually just moving across this little ridge, and this one stared back at another one, and then it kept on moving. So it wasn't, I can't say that it was a well thought through composition necessarily. It was a take the photo and let's see, if it gets better from there, which it didn't, because they all left that little shaft of light, and then they just all went into shade. So getting different giraffe images is quite difficult. They tend to be higher up against the sky, or a horizon cutting their neck, a high contrast horizon cutting them in half. And yeah, it's quite tricky to get a good giraffe image. It's not every day that you get to see them on a dark rock face, which I thought was quite unique. And again, just played around with the light to emphasize the giraffe and not the rock face. So that was, in retrospect, I would have actually liked to do a vertical composition because I like doing verticals on giraffes, but as I say, time-wise, wasn't on our side, unfortunately.
Yeah. And in this image, it seems like you're shooting in pretty low light. I know that the giraffe is in the light, but how are you managing, shutter speeds and making sure that you have, this is perfectly in focus and there's no motion blur at all? Have you capped that on your settings so that it can't go below a certain level?
I haven't. I used to when I was using a DSLR, but now with the stabilization that's become pretty good on the mirrorless camera bodies and lenses, I find that I can shoot quite low, fairly lower shutter speed than I used to, and obviously being selective with the subject, because if it's a moving subject, then you can't get away with it. But something like a giraffe that stares and freezes quite often is appropriate for a low shutter speed. And then also by decreasing the exposure, you're able to up the shutter speed a little bit because you're making up for it by taking away some light. So that combination, being selective about subject, underexposing, saving your ISO, being able to push your shutter speed a little bit higher than in a normal exposure if you wanted to expose this brighter, that combination works quite well in low light. But the contrast here made it happen. If this giraffe was in full shade, I'd had to have dropped my shutter speed way more. But the fact that it was in bright light and it had this dark background and I could underexpose, that's basically what was the saving grace here.
Very cool. And you were saying with mirrorless that you can get away with slower shutter speeds. Are you still following kind of the rule of thumb, which is 1 over double the length of your lens? Or are you even going below? Like if you're shooting a 200 millimeter, are you trying to stay above 1 over 400, or are you pushing it way down below that?
Yeah, you have to push it down. I mean, in my lens, I'm shooting with 100/500, and the max aperture is 7.1, the lowest it can go at full zoom. So I've had to learn to be very stable and to shoot at lower shutter speeds because of the 7.1. When I did have my prime, then I obviously my approach is a little bit different in that sense because I could get down to f4, which saves you a lot of light and a lot of shutter speed. But I've learned to trust the camera stabilization. The biggest challenge is if the vehicle is full of people, someone is bound to move. So everyone has just got their focus and then someone their position and then the whole vehicle shakes. So that's just part of the safari experience. But generally, I don't follow the 1 over rule anymore, as I did with my DSLR combination. just because of the in-body image stabilization as well as the lens stabilization combo working pretty well. I mean, there's sometimes you just don't have an option. You can't stay at, you cannot stay at a 500th of a second, or even a 400th of a second becomes tough. So then you have to get creative, either start panning or you just go very slow and hold your breath and hope everyone else holds their breath on the vehicle too.
Yeah, love that. All right, so this is the last image from South Africa, and we're thinking about going into images from Botswana, but I think we're gonna have to do a part 2 follow-up for that. So we'll talk about this image, and then we'll take a moment to answer some questions from folks that are on the call right now. So if you have questions, put those in the chat, and we'll get to those in a moment. But let's talk about this wild, colorful bird. What are we looking at here?
So this is called a crested barbet, or barbet. Some people say barbet, I say barbet, but it's actually a garden bird in the cities. You can find it in gardens with quite a bit of trees, like we have it in Johannesburg in the garden. But this was at Mala Mala, and it's such a you hear it more than you see it. It's always high up in a tree and that. And I stopped the vehicle as if we were stopping for a leopard when I saw this, because he had his little crest up, which is cool, and then he had his tail up as well. He's usually crest down, tail down, just perching on a branch. And he was eye level with the vehicle. He was on this beautiful open branch. He had this golden light coming off of the foliage behind him, and I just thought this is just amazing. And I do encourage guests to stop for small things as well. We don't pass the small things by, because it's all part of, the photography. It's not, I always say we're photographing light, not species necessarily. And even though everyone loves a big cat, this image, I mean, is much better than a sleeping lion image, for example. So it's, if you're into photography, you're into light, and then anything in good light is a win. So yeah, I love this scenario. He's hopping around this dead stump or dead log, and suddenly he just had he was like perched and alert, and it made for a beautiful photograph. Yeah.
There's so much attitude behind that shot. I love it.
Yeah.
All right, Rob, I'd love to pass it back to you. Do we have any questions in the chat that we can answer?
All right, thanks, Charlie. So before we dive into the questions, I'd like to remind everyone that you can't submit them via the question field in your control panel. Just go to that upper right-hand corner. You see those 3 lines there. Click on that, and that opens up a menu. Go to questions, and that's where we're living today. All right, so do you also use auto white balance?
That's a good question. I do use auto white balance. I switch between auto white balance and setting my Kelvin to 5,200. So in the winter season in Southern Africa, when everything is very nice and golden and it's dusty, then I usually set my Kelvin to 5,200 and my white balance is on that. And then in other seasons, I would set it to auto white balance and change it afterwards. I do shoot only in RAW, so it doesn't really matter in terms of the outcome, but I like getting the feedback on playback immediately. So I like taking images and seeing, wow, this looks accurate, or this is beautifully golden in camera. I feel that sort of gets you to take more images. It might sound silly, but I believe that the feedback of an image is quite powerful, the image that you take, especially because we're all chimping immediately and we're looking at what we've just taken. If it looks great, then you keep photographing. If it looks blue and off and cold, then you're not inclined to really keep shooting. So yeah, I do switch between auto white balance and Kelvin.
And when you're on the 5200, is that because with the dust, the quality of the light is shifting so quickly that you're just trying to have a constant so you can kind of see how the images relate to each other? Or why? Tell me a little bit more about why you, for that season, you use
I find it, yeah, it's a very orange season, so it's a very warm light season, and I find it matches the light beautifully. It's different if I was to shoot in a shaded winterthorn forest or anything, then that wouldn't work. But generally for sunlight, and the type of light, and the sun goes through a lot of dust, so you get this golden glow. And I think the 5,200 Kelvin is just the most accurate for those scenes. Yeah.
Very cool.
Great. Thank you so much. So what ISO cap do you use?
My camera is currently capped on 12,800, which is a stop or two above what I would like it to be, but it gives me a little bit of leeway to push it if it's necessary. I suggest to the guests to cap it at a stop or two above what they know the camera's limit is in terms of starting to show unacceptable noise. So I say to everyone, test it on your own camera. All sensors are different. Test it with highlights, test it with shadowed photos, and decide on what's an acceptable noise level for you. Take a lot of photos and go through them in editing and see what's acceptable. And then you set your cap 1 or 2 stops above that, just to give you a little bit of leeway if you do happen to see something extremely special when it's really dark.
Perfect. Thank you. Do you have any tips for night safari drives? How fast the lens needs to be? Anything else that you could give us a little help with?
Yeah, I wish all safari operators would use a diffuse light, because the spotlights that get used generally in Africa, some lodges use red spotlights, but generally they want to use white because the guests want to photograph things. Although when you shine that bright spotlight on an animal, it doesn't make for a great photo, to be quite honest. So some lodges, very few, have started using these diffusers on their spotlights, which is amazing because it doesn't make the animal squint, it's not hurtful to the animal, and you get beautifully diffused light as you would with a diffuser if you're doing portraiture, or a softbox. So that, to me, is the best solution for nighttime photography. If the camp doesn't have a diffuser, then what I suggest is that they bounce light, so that they bounce the spotlight into the ground or below the subject, not right into the face of the subject, both firstly for the well-being of the animal, I feel, and secondly for the light that gets thrown onto the subject. And once you bounce light, you'll find your settings a little bit easier. You can go to spot metering in terms of light metering. That's probably the best quick solution. Or you can underexpose. If you want to stay in matrix or evaluative metering, you're going to have this lit up subject on a completely black canvas. And then it's a good idea to go minus, because the camera is obviously wanting to lighten up the whole scene because there's so much darkness in it. So either spot metering, not spot focus, spot metering on the subject, or underexposing while you're in matrix or evaluative metering. Yeah.
Appreciate the advice. So when it comes to black and white photographs, are you taking them in black and white, or you do post to make them black and white?
I don't. I take them in color always, and then afterwards I keep the color version and I decide whether I want to convert it to black and white. Sometimes I feel like, if you've embedded it as a black and white and made it black and white forever, then you might be missing out on a good color edit. So staying in color, giving you a chance for black and white is always a good idea.
And what programs do you use for post editing?
I was saying to Charlie before the webinar started, I'm pretty simple when it comes to editing. I use Lightroom Classic, and that's my go-to. I don't use several programs just because I don't think I'll have the time to send one photo through 5 different programs. I did use Topaz denoise for high noise images before, but I think Lightroom's built-in denoise is pretty good for most photographs. I might still go to Topaz if it's something extreme, or DxO, but in general, my go-to is Lightroom Classic.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. So what would you recommend taking? What do you take when you go on a safari? your basic equipment?
In terms of gear, for Southern Africa specifically, for the regular type of vehicle safaris that we do and that you'd probably do when you come to Africa. So I'm not talking gorilla hiking and all of that. I'm talking vehicle safaris and boat safaris. A good focal length is maximum somewhere between 400 to 500. If you really like birds, 600 is the best. And then something like a 70 to 200 is really helpful for habitat images and for low light. So if you have to bring two lenses, a 70 to 200 2.8 is gold, and a something like 100 to 500 or 200 to 500 or 200 to 400, that's a really good combination. Prime lenses are difficult to travel with just because they're heavy and cumbersome, but if you can get a prime lens together with a 70 to 200 in your bag, then that's also fantastic. And then, as I said previously, 2 camera bodies are ideal, but if you can't do that, then you just change lenses as quickly as you possibly can.
Gotcha. Do you have a recommended frame per second setting?
I changed mine. We actually had this discussion on the latest NatHab trip. It's one thing that I generally leave on high speed in mechanical shutter. So I'm not on electronic fastest frame rate 20 or 30 frames a second. I find that that's a bit of a waste. But when I do see action happening, so a bird busy eating a bug and throwing it up and down, and you want to capture that in between moments, then I'll quickly switch to electronic shutter or a faster frames per second, like 20. Generally, I'm of the opinion that 10 frames a second is more than adequate for most action that happens on Safari. If you don't have 10, 7 is also fine, but shoot at your highest frame rate. If your camera cannot go up to 10 or 12, then choose your highest frame rate. I find anything above 20 pretty time consuming to go through, unless it's a very, very fast scene.
So you mentioned something about taking out your phone. So do you actually take photos with your phone? And if so, what do you have? Is there something I should be getting if I'm not going to be taking with a professional camera? Do you recommend a phone?
Look, these days the smartphones are actually better than a telephoto lens for landscapes, for example. And also when, as I said, the elephant's walking right by the vehicle, then my first suggestion is always for people just to look, because you can't take anything with a 500 if it's that close. And if you want to have the memory, then take it with your phone. So I do landscapes with my phone just for memory images. I find it's better than whipping out my telephoto lens in the moment. And then for memories, I use my phone all the time. So I'm always recording, mostly video, but also stills of things that are wider angle things, elephants close up, things that's just convenient to photograph with your phone quickly. Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, that is going to be the last question that we do have time for today. And people are really looking forward to part 2. So we got to get to that at some point. But I'd like to throw it back to you two for any closing comments you may have for us today.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your photography. You're doing amazing work. So thanks for all you do for wildlife conservation with your photography. And I'll pass it over to you for any last things to share.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie, for setting it up. It was good fun. We'll definitely do a.
Oh, looks like we just lost Danielle right at the last moment. But thank you all for tuning in, and big thanks to Danielle for walking us through her photography.
And Charlie, thank you, and Danielle both for joining us today for this wonderful webinar. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. So if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. If you're part of a photo club and would like NatHab to speak to your members about nature and travel photography, please email us at webinars@nathab.com. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. So long, everybody. We'll see you next time.